afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's hanging in there. So the Agency Operations and Business Transformation Roundtable. It's the biggest and longest named committee that we have here at the 4As. So from here on out, you're going to hear me talk about it as the AOBT, because we just didn't think that one through. But what we want to talk about today is what Ash was really highlighting, and that this is an area that we think is going to be critical for agencies in the future. And we founded the roundtable about 2 years ago based on the premise that operations is really at the heart of how an agency defines itself. And in fact, we really believe that it's operations that makes the agency's purpose real. And so as we think about that, we also were talking about, well, so why is it now becoming so important? I think anybody who's in operations is probably like, where you been? It's been important for a while, but it's really becoming more to a forefront because there's a number of different forces happening, right? So I think we all agree the business is getting a little bit more complex, and with that complexity, we're also seeing greater risk. So if we go back to the panel that Marla led earlier with data privacy and such, it's getting harder and there's more at stake. We're also seeing, as a result, an increase in the cost of doing business, and conveniently at the same time, we're continuing to see downward pressure on margin from clients as well, which makes it harder. And then last but not least, there's technology, which, while trying to simplify everything, obviously makes things also more complicated. So there's a lot going on. And so that's why I'm glad that I've got these two to co-chair the AOBT and to talk us through all of this. So I think as we get into it, just quickly, why did you guys even get involved with the AOBT? What were you looking for? What itch was that scratching for you?
Yeah, I can take that one. So hi, everyone. Great to be here. I started talking to Chick Foxgrover and Sal Conti in 2021, and I was a newly minted COO and CIO at the time. And my questions kind of revolved around where are my people? There were really great roundtables and forums for CEOs and CFOs, but just like everything Molly was talking about, the increase in complication of technology, the risk assessments that we have to do. I'm a media agency, an independent one. We work in a lot of regulated industries, healthcare and financial services. So it was as much a puzzle to solve for in terms of the risk and the regulations and managing information correctly as much as it was an innovation puzzle as well. And so I was really looking for a forum, a group of peers that I could talk to those issues about.
Great. I had a very similar story. It was actually the very beginning of the pandemic when everyone was trying to figure out how we're going to make everything work, and I had this blessedly short amount of free time, and I said, I'm going to do something that I've always wanted to do, which is explore all the resources that 4As has, because I've always seen their emails and heard about them, but I never really took advantage of all they had to offer. So I started poking around, and I saw, like Mike said, oh, they have a project management community, they have a finance community, they have a legal community. And it was a very similar thing where I'm like, well, what about operations? So I reached out, and Sal actually got back with me, and he said, well, it's kind of funny because there are quite a few people who are asking very similar questions. So we actually got together quite a few times and exchanged best practices. We had a small webinar that was virtual, and I thought, okay, this is really nice. I found other people like me, and I thought that was going to be the end of it. And then a few months later, Chick and Sal said, hey, would you like to, get this started and co-lead? And it was from there, everything was history.
And luckily it was. So just so we kind of level set a little bit, when we talk about operations, because you guys have very different backgrounds, what do you mean? Karen, can you define for us what you mean by operations in a modern?
Absolutely. And it was kind of funny because when I first reached out to Sal and I said, are there people who do operations? And he said, well, what do you mean by that? And I had a very hard time articulating because it's like, well, we kind of do a little of this and a little of that, but we do this too. And in the course of these last 2 years, as we've all come together as a community and started working on defining that, we really have concluded that what we are is we are the connective tissue or glue. So if you think of project managers, they're the glue that holds the project team together. Operations is the glue that holds the agency together. It works with all the different departments. So if you're having a big transformation in the agency, who's going to lead that and work with all the different groups around the agency? And one thing that we've also identified, and it was through actually a colleague who's part of the AOBT, and it was an aha moment for me, is the distinction between strategic and what we are calling managerial operations. And it's the yin and yang. You need both. But that was so profound because it kind of helped bridge the gap in some of the language that people were using, because some people, when they were talking about operations, meant one thing and some people meant the other, and we realized both are just as important. Whereas strategic, or I should say managerial operations, is optimizing the current and ongoing operations, think timesheets and billability. But then there's also the strategic part, which is leading change by transforming and evolving the business, large-scale technology changes, evolving with all the marketplace trends. That's where the other half of operations comes into play.
And I think through all of that, we've discovered it's really a team sport, right? I mean,
Yes.
we've got people on the committee who are in finance, operations, HR, IT. I mean, it's really anybody who's kind of touching how an agency does what it does, right? So, Mike, I want to ask you now, so how do you see, I mean, we've heard the terms transformation and disruption and revolution and evolution. I mean, it's kind of all fancy terms for change, right? So as we think about where the world is going, how is agency operations really going to help agencies to be successful in the future in that kind of environment?
Yeah, I think the name of the game is change and disruption, right? So especially in the media space where things are so fragmented, there's new technology every 5 seconds, and then we have the introduction of generative AI and a lot of new ways of doing work. I think where operations is really going to evolve and play a leading role in the grand scheme is working our way upstream into the value chain. And what I mean by that is, in some sense, being client-facing. So the team that I lead, we are client-facing. We're working with IT and analytics, legal, compliance, risk assessment to help build these solutions. And I think as we're introducing operations and technology-minded folks, it's really helping our clients start to see new value in a lot of ways in terms of how we're able to help them augment their infrastructure, their value chain, and how do we help them really craft the way that information can flow, and then what you ultimately do with that information. That's the really exciting and fun part, is a lot of new opportunity and innovation that can be derived from that.
That's great. So as you talk about kind of going from back of house to front of house, then that starts to raise questions around, well, is there billability in operations now? Are you guys not just a cost center?
There is now. Yeah,
How is
so
that
that's one of my favorite subjects, is sort of twofold, right? So we're, again, a media shop, and there's a lot that's very entrenched in terms of how media works. So when we're talking to our friends in procurement at the brands that we work with, there's a very specific view in terms of what it takes to do media. You need planners and buyers and strategists and a lot of emphasis on execution. And what we're making the case for is that you need all of those folks, but you also need technologists and analytics people and software engineers and solution architects to stitch all of this fragmentation together, right? And each client, we work in a business where each client brings their own unique tech stack and sort of idiosyncrasies to the table. And so as an agency, it's difficult and challenging to get governance around something like that, because by virtue of working with these client organizations, you're inheriting or accepting an awful lot of variation as it relates to technology and data, processes, procedures, et cetera. So I think that that's one way that we're really making the case for why these individuals need to be on scopes moving forward, and the value that they create, not just in terms of making things go faster and more efficient, but ultimately how we can help brands really augment what they're doing from a marketing perspective using technology. Internally, it's sort of the same thing as, I have conversations all the time. Well, Mike, why do you need software engineers? Why do you need solution architects, technical project managers, and the like? And it's to do all the things I just described. Is I really feel strongly that there's this opportunity to work our way all the way up through the service delivery value chain. And in so many respects, especially in media, you can't deliver service without this talent. So I'm making the case that the composition of the talent has changed, the game has changed, and we need to adapt to that and really drive it forward.
How are those arguments being received?
I'm winning so far.
Good job. We're rooting for you. I don't vote for the blue, but I'll root for you. One area of operations that doesn't, I think, get enough conversation around it is really its role in driving an agency culture, and particularly also the employee experience. And so I'm curious, Kieran, can you talk a little bit about what that relationship is, and how do you see operations actually impacting an agency's culture?
Absolutely. So earlier today, we heard a really great presentation about CX, and part of operations and inherently in the role that we play, we interact with so many different groups. We interact with practically every group. We also influence the ways of working, which directly affects the employee experience. So because of our touch points, we have an obligation to make sure we are very purposeful in how we present and making sure that we are adhering to our own values, our agency values, because we are truly affecting the employee experience on such a profound level.
I think that's a really great point. I mean, a lot of agencies will have our, our values up on the wall. We'll talk about our purpose, but an employee's experience and the way in which are able to get their work done is really where that purpose and value, the rubber hits the road, right? So the words on the wall are great, but if I'm having a lousy experience trying to get my work done, or the technology or the processes are making it harder, not easier for me to do the best work that I want to do, that's going to impact it. If the policies that are in HR aren't really helping me to feel cared for and what have you, that impacts my employee experience. And so I think really understanding that relationship, it goes from just being a way of getting things done to how are my employees feeling valued at work and recognizing this is a talent business.
And we
That's
also
important.
have exactly. We have a very unique, I think, perspective because being in operations, we work with so many different groups, but in individuals, and we kind of see the whole picture and we see the details. And I think a lot of people, and a lot of times, come to those of us in operations and say, "Hey, we don't know who to go to, but this isn't working. How do we get this done?" And of course, we're problem solvers. We love to dive in and figure out how to get that done. So I think that's another opportunity that we have to make things better.
Yeah, that's great. So, Mike, the theme of this event is sustained growth. So I think we need to address that. Where do you see operations playing a role in helping agencies achieve sustained growth?
I think for me, where this really bottom lines is in a business and a model that's still largely driven by an FTE model. You look at automation and AI and take that to its logical conclusion, right? So as a guy that's made a career out of doing things better, faster, smarter, what if it takes zero time to do the things that we do? And so I think of operations as an opportunity to, again, create new value, create more of a product orientation to a lot of the work that we do, whether it's creative or media, or starting to arrive in a place that starts to feel, to me at least, like a lot of digital transformation type work for our clients, stuff that approaches consulting. And so I think that sort of talent and the value that they can create, as much as we can decouple from an hours-based model and compensation, I think is really important. Because I think the threat of automation, or maybe the opportunity, depending on how you look at it, is really real, and it's going to be expected. It's going to put pressure on margins and what we're able to do. And so how do we start to really flip the model on its head and think about things very differently with different talent?
Yep, that's great. Now, Kieran, I'm going to switch a little bit here. The AOBT, even close to its inception, came up with a very ambitious task of creating a standard for operations. It's a lot of work. You've been spearheading a lot of that work. Can you talk a little bit about what is the purpose of that? What's the goal, and kind of what's the problem it's going to solve?
Absolutely. So when we started the AOBT, we were really wanting to provide value in the traditional sense of when we met, we would have guest speakers, we would have idea exchanges for best practices, but we said we also want to do something very tangible. And I admit, from a selfish perspective, I just wanted to be able to answer the question, what is it you do? And just hand them something. So that's what we're trying to get to, but in a much more comprehensive way. And when you look out there on Google or anywhere, you search up agency operations and you really don't find anything. You may find a couple little fragments here and there, but there's nothing comprehensive that addresses all the different areas, and specifically in an agency context. So what we decided is, you know what, how about we define that? How about we put that publication forth? And we have such a huge variety of expertise in the AOBT, of all levels, of all disciplines, and we've been really taking advantage of that insight and the experience to put this documentation together so that it will act as a guide, as something that people can use who are looking for tried and true practices, who are new to the field, who are actually curious about what it is that agency operations folks do. So it really is for everyone, and we intend to publish it shortly. It'll be a living and growing document. This will be version 1. If anyone's ever interested in joining the AOBT or having any input to this, we would greatly appreciate that.
And just quickly making a connection to what we were talking about earlier this morning about winning the people game, that's a huge part of what our hope is for this standard is, in a world where this talent can work anywhere, right? It's not just competing within an agency or a marketing realm, but banking, software, et cetera. Why sign up with an agency, right? And so trying to help define what the value is for this sort of talent and what we can do together and defining that for the industry, or at least trying to shape it, I think it'll give us a better chance of attracting and retaining really top tier talent.
Perfect. So Mike, it's impossible to have a conversation these days without talking about AI. So this is the obligatory AI section. Curious to get your sense on what is the role of operations in helping agencies figure out what AI is going to mean for their business, and conversely, how can AI help you?
Yeah, I love the presentation that Jason and Brian did. I think connecting it a little bit to that, there is, I agree with them 100%, this paradox of, efficiency versus innovation. And so from an operations perspective, the way that we're tackling it and some advice I would share is really focus on those core opportunities for capability and service delivery, the things that you do every day. That's sort of your gateway into leveraging AI for the low-hanging fruit. Those are perfect opportunities for proof of concepts and to get the employees engaged and excited about what you're doing and the promise of generative AI. And I think over time, quickly over time, what's going to happen is that's just going to be the new way of work. So we would characterize that as everyday AI. It's just, this is table stakes, everybody's gonna do it. It's sort of like using the web back in the day, right? Before that was a thing. AI is gonna be the new commonplace for that. And then I think that parlays nicely into things that would be maybe more innovative in nature. Things that would be, considered new ways of work, new value creation, new services and products. But where we're starting, and my recommendation would be, is start with that operational stuff, make things easier for employees, drive the engagement, get the excitement, and then take all of that energy and aim it externally for what you can do for your clients ultimately.
And one thing to add to that, I think that it'll also help drive agencies as learning organizations, because in order to make use of AI, you have to have accurate and usable data. And historically, agencies, I don't think, have been the best at knowledge management and making sure that we actually make use of that institutional knowledge and learn and grow from it. But I think this will force that agencies have to start cataloging and making that information and data accessible so that we can use it for things like AI.
And Karen and I have different experiences as quote-unquote operational people, but we click on so many different levels because of this, right? So the whole knowledge management piece, when you think about data, and what operations folks are really good at is looking across the silos and making connections and translating things across disciplines. That knowledge management piece is so important to AI strategy, right? So it takes that concept of garbage in, garbage out to a whole nother level in terms of what you're training your models on. So where that information resides, how it's governed, the lineage of it, who has access to it, all of that stuff is terribly important.
All right, so in our final moments, I always like to leave the audience with something tangible to walk away with. So I'd ask each of you, what is the one thing that you would encourage the audience to go off and do, or what would you want them to take away from our talk today?
Absolutely. So the operations folks that we're talking about may not have an operations title. They may not be officially part of an operations group, but you all know who they are. They're the people you go to when you're not quite sure who to ask about things. It's not really anyone's problem. You don't even know what the problem is, but you need someone to fix it. And they're the go-to people that somehow get it done and work across the silos that Mike mentioned and bridge all these gaps and make things really happen, make transformation happen, and an evolution of the agency. So what I would like everyone to take away is make sure to involve these folks up front, because that ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And what I've seen when they aren't involved up front is that often they're pulled in after the fact to help clean things up, and you don't want to go that route. So just involve them from the get-go. They will definitely bridge those gaps, help with the translations, and make sure things go as smooth as possible.
Same for me, it's about unlocking potential, right? And so operations people, we love to fix things. Fixing things is awesome. Making things is a lot more fun. And so if we can be a part of those early conversations with client organizations and with the teams up front, there's a lot of amazing work that we can do together. And I think that you will find that these folks are some of the most engaged people in your organizations and to leverage them in a different way will throw off a lot of ROI in the grand scheme.
That's great. And so, first of all, thank you both. I know we've got some questions that we'll do,
Thank
and
you.
I'll do a quick shameless plug for the AOBT. If you're interested or you have folks within your organization that you think would be great contributors to this group, we welcome them with open arms. For those of you who are interested in getting the standard once it's published, please feel free to reach out to me, and we'll get you on a list to make sure that you get it. And you've got my contact information here, so don't be shy about reaching out. So Ash and Amy, sorry. any
Yeah, if we
questions?
could ask one quick question. A lot of the non-billable talent is assumed to be covered by Media Commission. How do you recommend bringing costs associated with operations to the client?
I think it's to state the obvious, it's about positioning, right? And so there's the hours model, the commission model, and then there's I think the incremental value of these folks that would typically be characterized as overhead. And a lot of the work that we do, I haven't found too many brands, even the Fortune 100 ones, where marketing folks have access to their own IT people or analytics folks. And so that's where my team typically shows up, is to help augment and make that happen for them and engage with the teams that they have internally but maybe aren't scoped for marketing purposes. And that creates a lot of value in the grand scheme. And like I said, it starts to approach stuff that's digital transformation territory.
And one thing I would add to that is that I feel like, just like you said earlier, bringing them into early client conversations and demonstrating to the client the value that operations brings. I feel like we're kind of like maybe 2 decades ago where project managers were being sold to clients, and they didn't understand, why do I have to cover client or project managers? We have account, we have all these other capabilities. What do they do that these other groups or other roles don't do? And I think we're in the same position now. We have to make that case so that it just becomes the standard that we're covered and we are billable, because what we do has a direct result on the client deliverables.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.